Mr. Ryan Yada. Welcome, sir.
Hey, good morning. Welcome. How are you?
Wonderful, sir. What a summer it has been. You're coming off of one trip. You're heading on to another trip right now, or today, sometime later. And
Yeah,
what a packed summer it's been.
it's I guess yeah, we're almost with the kids here, right? We're almost at the halfway point already. Just does have a way of flying by. Although, yeah, I think both of us have a practice of being quite present, and I feel like even though it's gone by fast, I do have memory of all of it and good enjoyment of each day. So it hasn't gone too fast.
Yeah, yeah. I had an experience last weekend. We were in Kelowna visiting my family, and we went to this area called or this thing called the Wibbit. You know what that is?
Oh yeah, yeah, on the lake,
Yeah. So it's
right?
this for people who don't know what it is. It's this. It's almost, how would you describe it?
Bouncy castle on the water.
It's like a giant bouncy castle type thing on the water. There's all kinds of different areas, and you've got to it's like almost like an obstacle
Obstacle
course,
course.
like
Yeah,
an
yeah,
obstacle
yeah.
course bouncy castle on the water, and it's this huge area. We took my nephews, my nieces, and my oldest one. My youngest one was too young to go on it, but we took the oldest one, and I got to go with the kids. And first of all, what a workout it was for all of us. We were
Yeah.
all sore. Even the kids were all sore afterwards the next day. And I found it fascinating. Like I love going into experiences where I will at once be present in the moment, just experience like, oh, what's this is so cool. And then also taking moments where I feel like I'm looking at it from a third perspective, like a third person perspective. I'm kind of looking at it, I'm just analyzing. I love analyzing human behavior and how things work and all that stuff. And I remember watching our kids and even some of my one of my nieces when they were doing something really hard. Like what happens to a kid when they're confronted with doing something really hard, something
Mm.
that they don't know that they can do, something that the big kids are doing that they want to do but they can't. Like how do they approach that? And it was fascinating to see where kids give up, where kids continue on, and how I reacted to that as well. And it was really fascinating to see, them jumping on stuff and I had sometimes have a problem or I have a challenge with like where's the line that I draw with my kid, with my daughters. Like when do I say no, try again, try again, try again? Like you just try until you get it. Or is it okay, you don't have to do that now. Like you don't you can quit. And we were talking about just earlier on off air this idea about that I'd love for you to expand on this idea of being responsible for versus being responsible to. Like I feel sometimes I feel responsible for how my kids feel. Like I want them to feel courageous. I want them to feel brave, and I want them to feel confident. I want them to feel happy, and I'll do whatever it takes for them to feel that way. But really, at some point, like there's a line. Like I can't cross that line to make them feel any certain way, or just rig the system in their favor, because that's not really what life is. It's not really how it works. And the more that I protect them from certain emotions, the worse off that they'll be. And we've all seen the helicopter parent and the kids who are only ever given praise and only ever given the easy life, that only ever things are always done for them. It doesn't seem to work out well for them. Like they don't develop resiliency, they don't develop confidence, they don't develop courage, they don't develop a sense of their own self.
Yeah. I totally know what you're talking about on the, well, yeah, I'd love to talk some more about that and the Wibbit. I know those exact obstacles on that course too, because and you're right, it's an awesome workout. It's a ton of fun to get out there, right? Because it's so slippery, and we play tag sometimes on that. But yeah, you get like the ones where you have to rope swing or you have to monkey bar across, or you have to do a rope swing, or the big ones you can jump off of. And
Yeah.
you can see, you're right, those moments where the kid's like, I don't know if I can do this, or this is really gonna hurt, or whatever's going through the head. And you can see the kids that just blindly throw themselves off it, or you can see the kids that take, like I've been there with some of my relatives in Regina. They have one too on one of the lakes,
Mm.
and so that's sort of a tradition is we'll go out there with my kids and their cousins, and you can see like the different personalities and how long it takes someone sometimes to work themselves up to something, and then they'll get hurt, and then how do they come back from that? Do they just never do it again? Do they get right back on it? Does it take a lot of coaching? I think you're right. From just looking at kid and parent psychology, it's fascinating just to look at each kid and how they handle those things. And I was actually, funny enough, I was having a chat with a friend yesterday just about this exact scenario and how it's so it's so personalized. Like the combination of the kid and the parent and all the other experiences in their life and in your life, like leading up to that moment of that kid on that obstacle course in that event or whatever it is, that particular obstacle in front of them. There's so many factors that the it's so unique. I feel like, I mean, in one sense, in terms of what that kid needs right then, is
Hmm.
not the same as any other kid potentially. So that is, I think, a fascinating part about being a parent is like, man, what do I do here? Because it was so easy for the other kid, or this other kid responded so much differently, right? Like it's so unique. I
Yeah.
think it's just the big challenges and growth things as being a parent, I feel like.
Yeah. So talk to me about the idea you expanded on, but responsible for versus responsible to.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's been a huge distinction just to have that language. And then looking back over my life where like, oh wow, I've I can see where there's been times where I've taken too much responsibility for things that maybe I shouldn't have, that aren't my, cross boundaries where I've taken responsibility for things that maybe I shouldn't have, that aren't mine to be responsible for. And then times where there are things should have been responsible for that I wasn't, and I can think of some specifics here, but just in general terms, figuring out what we really want to be and should be responsible for as guys, as husbands, as fathers, and then the things that we're not responsible for, that are we want our kids to be responsible for, our friends or our wives, and then versus the things that we're responsible to. Um, you know, for example, like you're talking about with kids and helicopter parenting, like ultimately we're not responsible for, I believe, our kids' internal sort of experience, right? We can't be like that's their.
Hmm.
I want them to have their own experience of life. I want them to have their own wins and their own losses and their own learnings and their own. I mean, try this. This is the part I know probably with my first. I'm trying to think back, like as a parent, you want it's hard to see them experience pain or suffering, or
Yeah.
fear or upsetness or whatever, and you want it to go away, and so it can be. I think the trap to fall into is wanting to be responsible for that. We want it to go away. We want to fix it. We want to take it away. And yet it's so important for, I think, a child to be able to experience those emotions, to learn how to actually process and handle them, and then to grow from that, right? Because they're going to experience them more in life. It's not just going to be the first time ever, that they're going to experience some sort of hardship. So I think that's an example for me where I know I've overstepped in the past. I know I'm much better at it now. I think I am. In terms of I'm responsible to my child in terms of supporting them, holding space for them, maybe giving them some advice, some coaching, some life and lessons that I have. At the end of the day, though, they need to learn how to be responsible for their internal experience. They need to be responsible for their life. They need to be responsible for those emotions and learn how, not just going to like be like, well, that's your problem, you got to figure it out. No, I'm going to,
Hmm.
different ages, I'm going to be there in different degrees of support. But at the end of the day, that's to me an example where when it comes to like emotions and learning how to regulate them and handle them and deal with hardships in life, Yeah, I think that's something that I want them to be responsible for, and then figuring out what I can do that I'm responsible for, and how do I be responsible to them again, but not for these things that are internal to them.
Yeah, and I think it's so there's an old saying that is very similar when it comes to our spouses. The happy life, happy wife, and I totally understand the sentiment that we want the people around us, we want our spouse to be happy, we want our kids to be happy, we want everybody to get along, we want everybody to just enjoy this thing, but it's not up to us because we can't, yeah, like you said, we can't control the internal state of any one other person. We don't have that power. Like to imagine that we have that sort of influence over everybody in our life is ludicrous, is ridiculous. But we're responsible to those people. And I think it's great that language it really puts the onus back on us on what we can control, and that I'm responsible for me. I'm responsible to you by being responsible for me, and I really love that, and I think that that's such a great distinction, and just in practical terms, like how do you think that would look? Like what does that look like for? Let's say you said like you're much better at it now. Like what would you have done differently then versus what you do now? That you're more responsible to them versus responsible for them.
Yeah. Like, I mean, there's an example just yesterday. Like my son, he took him up to Whistler. He's got summer training for his skiing, and I used to be more involved. Like I used to, actually go. They do this water ramp, so they ski down a dry slope, and they do their aerial. It's not aerials; it's freestyle skiing. So they'll do their, um, what language would he use? If I don't use the right language, it's not aerials. It's freestyle skiing. So he'll do his flips and his, anyways, tricks, and land in a pool. And so I used to, when he was younger, be more responsible for what was happening there. Like I would go actually in and I would sit there and help him with the equipment because he's younger and you got to put on a wetsuit. There's a lot of stuff going on. At his age now, I'm like, okay, I don't want to be responsible for his success or his not like his path here. Like there's a point here where I want him to be more responsible for than himself, where it's intrinsic. I don't want him to think that he's doing this for me.
Mm.
Or I don't want to be in it, because there's something I need from it. So I'm realizing that I can, at this stage of his development and his age, I want to be responsible for getting him there, and that he can't drive himself there. I'm responsible for paying for it. He doesn't have a job at this point. And I want to be responsible, to him in terms of support and all that. But now been a transition of there's things that he's now responsible, much more responsible for things. Like he made his, food that he had to bring there. He's responsible for getting himself there, responsible for getting all his equipment on, responsible for how he shows up with the coach. And so that's a shift, and it's age dependent. I think it's, kid in terms of maturity. It's where I'm at within myself, and just realizing that like I want to make sure he's doing it for himself, that he's not doing it for some external reason. And I want to make sure that I'm showing up for him and not for something within myself that I'm, needing to get out of this either. So I don't know. That to me was an example. I was like, oh yeah, like because I asked him. I said, do you want me to be right there with you? Did that feel good before? Would that feel good now? What do you want from me here? And he's like, it was probably appropriate before. And he's like, now he's like, I got this. You don't need to come in.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, I'm gone. You got this. So, yeah, to me, that was a big shift yesterday. And this language really helped me to understand, like, yeah, and still feel empowered. Like, yeah, I'm responsible for these things. I'm not responsible for these things. That's now, and it's a sort of a line that moves, I think, as they get older. Um, because at the end of the day, it's you're saying, like, we can't be responsible for someone else's state or journey or path. Like, that's where I think parents can get really frustrated is, I'm doing all these things for you, and yet you're still like this, like, oh, you're not
Mm.
happy, or you're not grateful, or you're not showing up in a way that I think you should, despite all the things I'm doing for you. I think that's where we get caught in the you I think I should be responsible for you being a certain way, or like your life turning out a certain way, but we're not. That's where I think there needs to be a line, because we'll drive ourselves nuts trying to be responsible for someone else's happiness. We can't be. Like, that's their internal experience. They need to be responsible for that. And if we overstep that boundary, I think we rob them of the ability to figure out how to do that for themselves too, as if as our with our kids.
Yeah, and I think about for my own self, when I overcome something really difficult, when I overcome something that I thought was not possible before, and then I do it, man, like the sense of pride, the sense of confidence, the sense of joy, the sense of accomplishment that I feel within myself is huge. And I want my kids to feel that way as well. So it's like this weird, yeah, you're saying like there's this weird line that kind of shifts and moves. And yet, when it comes down to it, if we want our kids to have or to be courageous, then they need to be put into situations and have experiences where they need to show courage, which means that they're going to have to do things that they feel uncomfortable with. And I love what Jordan Peterson said. He said it's important to do dangerous things carefully.
Mm.
I really like that, and that's one thing I say to my kids, and I know it's one thing that I've definitely had some differing of opinion with my wife sometimes with the kids, is what's appropriate to do, like what's dangerous, what's too dangerous, what's not dangerous, and I know I feel like I have my own limits, and I know when I'm there watching them do dangerous things that yeah, they can fall, but I do my best to be there for them, but always to tell them like, yeah, you need to do dangerous things carefully, like do this, like be aware, be present, and that
Right.
teaches them to be able to have that sense of self and to know that they can do it.
Yeah, and that's where it's so fascinating, the all the combinations of, like, because your wife has her whole life experience, you have yours, and then you each have a different dynamic with each kid. So there's so many ingredients that will change, how someone would respond in that situation, in terms of what considered dangerous, right? Because you have a whole other experience with that child as well, like I do with my kids, and that's different than my wife. Like, I've seen my son do all kinds of things, so I know where his threshold is. But if someone were to just come in the moment, they're like, "Oh my God, that's so dangerous. That's so scary." I'm like, "Oh no, like he's done years of training to get to the point where he knows how to do this quite safely."
Yeah.
She heard you talking about her.
Yeah. Everyone's just waking
She's
up here
being,
in our household.
yeah, it's the so I think it's just so fascinating how it's so, I think every situation, every kid, every parent, there's so many different factors. Um, it just that's where I think, having, our own sort of being really, I guess, all this personal growth, like being really clear with where you're at, is so helpful. Having a great support group, friends like yourself, and our dad groups, to be able to bounce
Mm-hmm.
things off of, like, hey, what have you guys done in this situation? Because I've, in my dad group, there's guys that are kids are but much older, so they can be like, oh yeah, I've been there before. Like, that's so helpful. But I do come back to, just, there are so many factors that, and no one's necessarily wrong in that, right? Because it could feel really scary for someone, and yet it's not for you. And the other thing that I was thinking of yesterday, I was watching this dad, and this kid. His kid was landing an airplane, like, I guess, like a small sort of private Cessna, some kind of airplane, and the kid was 6 or 7, and
Wow.
in a booster, in a car seat, landing this airplane, and it was really cool to watch. And that would be terrifying for some parents, right? And terrifying for some kids, but that
Yeah.
kid likely. that kid likely wasn't just dropped into the seat and this was the first time they've been doing it, right? They've probably done this however many times, but we see this little snippet on Instagram. But I just think that there's definitely this line, and it's so different with every kid, and it's so different with every parent, where I think if the kid is made to be responsible for too much too early, that can also stress them out, and create essentially trauma. Like if, I remember the definition that Tony had of trauma is just more stress than our system can handle, like where we
Hmm.
get just overwhelmed to the point where now it creates memory. So you could drop some kid in there and it would be a traumatic experience. You could drop some parent in there and it'd be a traumatic experience. Like it would be you'd end up giving them too much responsibility for things that they're just not capable of being responsible for. So that's where I
Hmm.
think, like you said, it's done carefully, but it's done progressively. It's done in a way where they feel supported. Like there's this whole framework I like in terms of empowering that kid to be able to do something like that. It's I do, you watch, I do, you help, you do, I help, you do, I watch. So you get them to the
Hmm.
point where she's landing that plane on her own, but it's been this, very progressive, process where it's not overwhelming by the time she's actually doing it. Versus if you just drop them in a seat and said, "You do this, I'll watch." That's where I think this framework needs to be done carefully in terms of helping kids be more responsible for things. Is it's got to be done, I think, in a progressive way, where yeah, they can land an airplane. And the dad was really great. Like his coaching, I can tell in that situation where he's very calm in terms of just the little guidance he's giving her. So she's calm because he's calm, and he's like, you can kind of feel this like air of you've got this. We've done this before. You've got this, and it's a fascinating little video to watch.
Hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of when we were in the Whibbit over the weekend, when some of the kids, when I remember my daughter jumping over like from one part to another, and kids were just jumping from one to the other, and my daughter did it the first time she tried, she did it, and then the second time she did it, she failed. She hit the thing, fell in the water, and then I helped her up, and she tried again, failed, and then after a while, 3, 4 times, she's like, I can't do it, I can't do it. And I remember in that moment going, okay, what do I do? What do I do? She can do it. I know I've seen her do it. Do I push her to the point where she's traumatized that she's like, oh my God, Dad, stop? Or do I continue? And in the moment I felt, no, we're going to continue. And I remember saying, like, you've done it before. I'm like, have you done it? She's like, yeah. I'm like, so it means you can do it. You just haven't done it again yet. I'm like,
Hmm.
you can do it. You did it. You did it. Like, you know exactly how to do it. I'm like, well, just take a second. Let's take a breath. I said, do you feel okay? Like, are you really hurt? She's like, no. I'm like, okay, let's try one more time. Let's see what happens. And so she tried it again, and oh, she got it. And I just loved that. And then after that, it was like, oh, she just went off to do whatever. But I could see, and I could definitely see in some other kids where they would try something and they would just kind of get yanked out of the water. And it's like,
Hmm.
okay, no, let's continue. Don't worry about it. We'll just, I'll pick you up. And I'm like, oh man, like I've definitely been there with my kid, just not allowing them to get past even the first hurdle. And I think one of the, like Tony always talks about positive intent. Like there's every action, there's a positive intent behind it, regardless of how destructive we may feel it is. When someone says something mean, when someone does something mean, when does something inappropriate or nasty to you, or does something really mean to someone else, there's always a positive intent behind it. And I know for some parents, I've seen it definitely go from one extreme to the other, where they were definitely the helicopter parent and they recognized that they were, and then just went totally hands off. And
Hmm.
that also wasn't great either. And I can see, if like just from like, oh, they just felt so guilty. They just felt ashamed that they had done that to their kid, and they were robbing them of this experience. But then on the other side, they're like robbing them of support. And but to know that, whenever we mess up, like I know for my kids, like I want to give them the things that, even though I had an amazing childhood, I felt like I had this amazing life growing up, and I felt like I was never without. Granted, yeah, like I wanted 5 pounds of candy for dinner one night, but they said no, shit like that. But they I was always provided for. Yet I want to give my kids the things that I never felt like I had, or I want to give them the things that I learned, and I don't want them to have to go through the struggle and go through the challenge and go through the hardship of learning the things that I've learned. And in that, there can definitely be a sense of, yeah, I'll be responsible for you. Just I've figured it out. I'm the dad. Just I'll put you on my shoulders. Let's go. And but to know that, but like just that doing that, there is a positive intent. You love your kids so much, you'll do anything and everything for them, and that's okay. So we don't want to beat ourselves up when we do miss the mark on it.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I
Yeah,
know
which we
I
will.
definitely, as dads, I mean, there's a very much talked about idea of and concept about mom guilt,
Mm-hmm.
and that is super real, and I totally get it. And for a lot of dads, I feel like there's not a lot of acknowledgement or talk about that same thing for dads, that we're meant to somehow just be these providers that are stoic and are devoid of emotion, and that we just go along with what is, we go along with the happy life, happy wife, happy life, that we are these beings that all of a sudden become subservient to the needs of others.
Mm-hmm.
And that if others aren't having the experience that we want, it must be because we're shitty people. It must be because I'm an asshole. It must be because I'm not enough. And that's not true at all. We've bought into this idea that we're responsible for everything when we're not. We're responsible to others by being responsible for ourselves. And I've seen you countless times. I mean, when you show up at your best, I mean, everything else goes a lot easier for everybody else. And when you try to, or when I try to just be there for everybody at the lack of myself, like taking away from myself, not filling my cup first, not putting my oxygen mask on first, it never ends up well. It might end up well in the moment, but in the long run, it's so destructive.
Yeah, I saw someone post, um, sort of a riff on this concept where he said "Happy King, Happy Kingdom."
Mm.
Um, where again, yeah, it can feel, I think, overwhelming, or this is where I think it feels, what's the right word? Just uncomfortable if we think we need to be responsible for other people's happiness, like even in that sense of the kingdom, like, I can't make my kids happy. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, that's their internal experience. I don't want to make them happy, right? Because otherwise, if I do, sure, I could. I could tell some jokes. I can, I can temporarily probably get them into a happy state. But if I continue to do that, in my opinion, then they're needing something from the outside to have them feel a certain way, which isn't scalable. I always use that language in business, but I want them to have this be sustainable, to have it be scalable, because they're not always going to be in our household. They ultimately need to figure out how to make themselves happy, like how to be happy, and have that not be from external things, right? That to me is what we've talked about so much, is that intrinsic inside out. I want them to learn how to just be happy without needing anything from the outside. And so if I'm thinking I need to be responsible for their happiness, then I'm creating really a lose-lose situation. I'm creating a situation for myself that I'm not going to be able to win long term for sure. I'm creating a situation for themselves where they're not going to be able to win long term if they're, again, seeking validation or seeking happiness from the outside. That's, in my opinion, setting them up for some hardships down the road for sure. Some therapy, some coaching, some personal growth. Yeah,
Mhm.
but um, yeah. Anyways, that's yeah.
Yeah, I think, and I know that at the end of the day, if I want that for my kids, the best way to do it is not to tell them, hey, you're responsible for yourself. Hey, you're responsible for this. Hey, you need to figure this out on your own. Hey, you need to do this. The best way that I can do it is to do it myself. And I'm not preaching, I'm telling myself right now because I know that I need to hear that more for myself, that I am responsible for my own happiness. And I'm not, how many times I know that I allow the dictates of how the other girls in my house, I'm in a house full of girls, and how much their emotions drive mine. Yet I know that I can much better influence the way that they see themselves, see the world, and how they feel by taking control of myself, being responsible for myself, finding happiness, finding joy, finding peace, finding all of that within myself.
That's awesome. You're right. That's an awesome again perspective to take with this same language is where are we not taking responsibility for things and asking, thinking that others need to be responsible for our own state, our own emotion, our own life experience. Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely remember the distinction at some point in my journey here where I realized that yeah, I was looking for things externally to be responsible for helping me feel something internally. And then, like achievement, like it was an achievement model I think I largely grew up with, right? Whereas if I got good grades, if I did well in sports, that meant something about me. So I was
Mm-hmm.
looking for an external thing to be responsible for an internal way I wanted to feel about myself. But yeah, you're right. Our work is to be that example of I'm responsible for how I show up, independent of what's going on outside of me. And that's not always easy. And you're right, it can be easy to put a lot of guilt on our shoulders in terms of, oh, things aren't going the way I want them to. I mean, that's one of the hardest things I'm experiencing with a teenager is just, oh, that's not what I would have done, or oh, I could see how this might go, or oh, I would go differently, or I could see, I want this to be different for her. And yet it's not my life. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
responsible to her and for a lot of things, roof and food and support and love, unconditionally, or what's going on or how she even acts to me. Like I'm responsible for how I show up for her, and I will show up unconditionally loving despite whatever's going on. And I'll let her know if I think something's off. But at the end of the day, I'll give her my advice for sure. And I say that I've got these, I won't preach all the time. I'll just say, hey, look, I've got a dad thing I'd like to share with you. And so I'll just say, look, this is just going to take a little bit. So they know, okay, I'm going to listen for this little bit here. And dad's not always preaching because then I think they just turn off. I'm like, look, just can you give me a minute here? I've got a dad thing I want to share, and I'll say it. And I remember Thomas had shared this as well. Like that was really helpful with his father. Is I'll share it once, maybe twice max, and then that's it. I'll plant the seed. I'll give them my own life experience story. I'll give them my perception, and then ultimately at the end of the day, especially as they get older, I want them to be the leader of their own life. So there's going to be a lot that they're going to be responsible for, and they're going to make different choices, and it's not going to always turn out. And they're going to ideally, the whole point of that is that they'll learn from it versus if I'm making that decision for them and it doesn't turn out, now they can go, well, see, Dad, it didn't turn out. You made this choice for me. It didn't turn out well. Now I'm the one with the learning, not her.
Right.
So yeah, that's a phase that is a new level of this whole responsible for and responsible to thing.
Yeah, I love that we've never been given a manual on how to do this parenting thing, how to do this dad thing. And yet we just when we think we've figured something out, we're thrown another
Next
curveball.
level.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. But that's okay. That's part of the learning. That's part of the growing.
Yeah. We wouldn't want it any other way, right?
That's right. All right, my friend.
Yeah, we're
Well,
gonna
enjoy the day.
show here. Yeah, yeah. Awesome to see you, man. Always a wonderful conversation. Hopefully, this can be of help to others or some interesting tidbits that people can reflect on and go, "Oh, maybe." Or those guys are totally out to lunch. I'm gonna do things totally differently.
That's okay.
Yeah.
We love it. All right, man.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you
All
later.
right. Yeah. Thanks, bro.